It's currently late August 2020, and normally at this stage of the year I'd be starting to look back on the very many airshows we've been to, thinking about the best bits that we might include in our British Airshows Roundup programme at the end of the year. And a few years ago we also used to produce a European Airshows programme as well, the best bits of the European shows that we covered. Well, this year, not much to choose from, sadly. We haven't been to any outdoor airshow events. A few of the virtual shows that you'll have seen or hear on YouTube on these Saturday broadcasts. But no, nothing to look back on. I thought then I'd dip back, take a bit of a flashback to the 2010 airshow season. It's been a bit of a theme this year. It has been a year I've dipped back to, 2010, quite a few times for some of the airshow rewinds, etc. that we've done. So these then are some of the very best bits that we haven't included so far, with a bit of a leaning towards the European shows. We covered something like 8 events in Europe that year, more than 30 events in total in 2010, so lots to choose from, and it's going to make for an exciting video. So 2010 was the last year of the Harrier, so we will end with the Harrier's final flights at the tail end of that year, and we'll head to Gothenburg, Sweden, for a celebration of 100 years of flying over there with a couple of foreign display teams, including Fred alongside the Swedish classic jets, which would, a remarkable operation over there. And towards the tail end of the year, we'll head to Dunsfold, home of the Harrier over the years, and we weren't to know it at the time, but the last time that the Harrier would perform at an airshow there. And we'll take things right through to the end of 2010, to December that year, to the end of the Harrier over at Cottesmore. Let's kick things off where we started that year though, at the Abingdon Air and Country Show.
We started our 2010 airshow season at what's become the first major event on the British airshow calendar, the Abingdon Air and Country Show. It was first show for me as well. This year promised to be the biggest since the RAF's last event at this airfield in 1990. And it had attracted its first foreign fast jet military participation in the form of the Dutch F-16. But there was almost a last-minute showstopper when Defence Estates, who own the airfield, decided that the runway was unfit for fixed-wing aircraft, despite regular use by the local volunteer gliding squadron and also by occasional RAF transport aircraft. But that left the bulk of the aeroplanes operating from nearby airfields, although Tony de Bruin found a way round the ruling and he made a welcome arrival on Saturday for the static display. The RAF was also very supportive of the show with a fly-past from the C-17 from nearby Bryce Norton, and also a very welcome and unusual airshow appearance from the VC-10. So it was the first public display of the year for some of the RAF's display teams. And the Tucano gives us a good opportunity to introduce one of the key themes at many shows in 2010, the 70th anniversary of the Battle of Britain.
I'm Flight Lieutenant Martin Wintermeyer. I'm the Tucano display manager for the 2010 season. I'm managing Tom Bolt, who's the display pilot. Well, this year is the 70th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, as you've said, and we decided the paint scheme this year would actually reflect the few who fought in the Battle of Britain. Not just Spitfire pilots or Hurricane pilots, but all the crews that fought in the Battle of Britain. We're really looking forward to Abingdon, the start of the show. It's always nice to get underway. There's been a lot of hard work, as you've alluded to, in the work up for it, so we're looking forward to this show.
The Dutch F-16 had a new display pilot for 2010.
My name is Tobias Hightech Schutte. I'm the display pilot of the Netherlands Air Force F-16 demo team. And I'm here today performing at Abingdon for the Abingdon Air and Country Fair. In my opinion, particularly difficult to fly is the outside turn, because it is very unnatural. All the interpretation of the instruments that I can read off in the HUD have to be interpreted upside down, since I'm flying upside down. Unfortunately, we were not able to land here today, which happens also in, for instance, the Seaside shows. Whereas we take off from a different base and we fly to the location itself, and then we simulate a takeoff by just doing a low approach, and then from there on it's basically the same demo as from the field itself if we were to land, which ends of course again in a low approach instead of a full stop landing.
A fantastic achievement for the event organisers at Abingdon, getting the Dutch F-16 there. Superb to see the flying display, if not on the ground. We'll head over to the continent now. I said that this video will have a bit of a European slant, so I'll take large chunks from my European Airshows 2010 programme, and the first of those is from ILA Berlin, my only trip to that show. A400, ME262, ME109, and lots of frontline German assets towards the end, including Phantoms, Typhoon, Transall, things like that. Superb show. We did quite a few shows like this in 2010 and around that period, where just one or two of us would head over to the continent, do some filming for this programme, for a kind of highlights package at the end of the year. And it's something I'd like to get back to in the future when such things as foreign travel and air shows happen, we hope. Let's get on with the flying, shall we, from ILA Berlin. As I say, the main draw that year, the first appearance of the A400M.
Perhaps the most potent demonstration of new technology at ILA 2010 was provided by Airbus. This show was the world debut for the brand new Airbus military A400M tactical airlifter. Still in the relatively early throes of its flight testing programme, it may have been at the time of its Berlin appearance, but the A400M was flown through an extremely spirited and confident routine by its crew, headed by British test pilot Ed Strongman. 16 years on from the first appearance of a full-scale mock-up of what was then termed the FLA, the Future Large Aircraft, at Farnborough, here was the real thing in the air, and a superb sight it made. Ed Strongman's lively performance concluding with one of the talking points of the ILA show week. His pitch up and then 120-degree wing over, the maximum angle of bank able to be attained by the A400M. An impressive performer indeed. And this wasn't the only show star to be contributed by Airbus.
So my name is Peter Chandler. I'm one of the experimental test pilots at Toulouse, and I was one of the project pilots for the A380, so I flew it a lot during the initial flights and the development. On the takeoff I'm using full power. It's called takeoff and go around power toga, and even then I think you'll find listening to it that it's quite quiet. Rotate the airplane, I'm just using a normal takeoff technique, but just after that then I'm turning a little earlier than probably you would see in a normal airliner, again to try and keep the airplane fairly close to the crowd for the whole display. Because it's a fly-by-wire airplane and an electronic flight control system, it means we can put certain protections in there to, if you like, protect the airplane from going outside of the normal flight envelope. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm flying using the protection just to keep us at low speed, but keep us well within the flight domain.
The flying programme at ILA is always more varied than at most trade shows, with plenty of historic aircraft taking part, and amongst them, as ever, a large contingent from the Austrian-based Flying Bulls. Of particular interest on this occasion, the ILA debut of the Flying Bulls P-38L Lightning, this currently the sole airworthy example of the type in Europe.
Zeitlose Form der P-38 Lightning selbst heute, wenn sie als Mehrauflage.
This particular P-38, the former mount of the famed American display pilot Lefty Gardner, was imported to Europe by the Flying Bulls a couple of years ago. From one of the Flying Bulls' gleaming American classics to another, the immaculate Douglas DC-6.
I'm Raymond, so I'm fully engaged with the Flying Bulls as pilot, and a couple of very nice airplanes which I'm allowed to fly.
My name's Andy, I'm the flight engineer for the DC-6.
Hello, I'm Frederick and I'm also a captain on the DC-6. For me this is my other job. The other one is flying Airbus 330 and 340s, but honestly this is the airplane to fly.
So the first low pass normally is with an elevation about 2,000 feet over the airfield, and we just force it down about 2,000 feet.
The big differences we have with this type of airplane is as we accelerate, manifold pressure, engine power climbs, so I'm constantly closing the throttles while we're accelerating to maintain a fixed manifold pressure. And then as the airplane starts to slow down again, I'm then pushing the throttles open again to bring the manifold pressure back to the required amount. And all the time adjusting the cowl flaps to keep the engine temperatures within the parameters. So we're pretty busy.
Our cameras also went on board the third member of the Flying Bulls American trio at ILA, the B-25J Mitchell.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm flying on the P-25 since almost 10 years now for Red Bull. Yeah, this is the first pass. We run in very fast, coming down from 2,500 feet. We reach almost 300 knots. And it's a steep climb up, hard left turn, around 60 degrees of bank. We don't want to get too steep. Co-pilot is checking the instruments, manifold pressure and RPMs. Now it goes into the right turn for a right 180 again. Again, coming up, watching for the speed. We don't go below 160 knots. After that we had to freestyle a little bit to change the program because there was so much airline traffic. We had to move out to the northern part of the runway. Normally, now we would turn in for our photo pass to show the top, but this wasn't possible, so I had to turn left all the way around.
And another of the Flying Bulls items at ILA was the MBB Bo 105 helicopter. This one of the most aerobatic of rotary wing machines, and in Rainer Wilke, its pilot, it has at the controls one of the best exponents of such flying as well. Historic aircraft attend ILA from far and wide across Europe. One of the home team was the Deutsche Lufthansa Berlin Stiftung's Junkers U-52 3M, which was giving pleasure flights throughout the event. Meanwhile, over from France, specifically from his base at Avignon, was Frédéric Acari, an Air France captain who owns and flies an immaculate Hawker Fury. This aircraft, powered by a Wright R3350 rather than the type's original Bristol Centaurus engine, plenty of opportunity here for Frédéric Acari to exploit its power in the blue skies over Berlin. Blue skies that were, as you can see here on one occasion, somewhat obscured by a large dust storm blown up from the construction site for the neighbouring Berlin-Brandenburg International Airport, scheduled to open in 2012.
Dieses Flugzeug fliegt, aber offensichtlich mehr als eine Maschine dieses Typs im Bestand. Denn mir persönlich hat gesagt, das ist eine Seafury.
Two of the great stalwarts of the German airshow scene here, Walter Eichhorn and his son Tony, have put together an innovative combination display of trainers. Walter flying the Jet L-29 Delphin, behind Tony in the North American T-6. Czech-built Delphin, in this case, interestingly re-engined with a Rolls-Royce Viper turbojet. A pretty rare sight at a German airshow is a Hawker Hunter, this one of two brought to the event by the Fliegermuseum Altenrhein in Switzerland. A single-seat Hunter F-58 was in the static park, and displaying here a two-seat T-68 model. But if there are two historic aircraft that people come to ILA to see above all others, it has to be the EADS Heritage Flights Messerschmitt Me 262 and Bf 109 G4.
My name is Wolfgang Schedewan. I'm with EADS now for almost 20 years and presently having the task of the chief test pilot within the military air systems organization. Basically the main goal is to demonstrate to the public the special attraction of the aircraft, and not trying to, like could be done on air shows, trying to compete with modern type aircraft like the Rafales or Gripens or Eurofighters. That's not our task and not our goal. We are aiming for preserving this aircraft in a flying state for as long as possible, so we are hopefully talking about decades. So we are certainly not going to the edges, and only trying to present the aircraft and the loveliness of the shape of the aircraft to the public. And this can be done in more or less conventional maneuvers, and flying turns and making best use of the sunlight and showing the wings to the audience and those things.
Messerschmitt viele Dinge eingebaut, die er den Motorflugzeugen über die ganzen Jahre hinweg erprobt und getestet hatte.
My name is Klaus Plaza. I'm a German citizen and I've been with EADS since I believe 5 years or so. I do some flight testing for the EADS, and also called in to fly these beautiful old airplanes, which I've done outside of EADS previously also. During the display I do a selection of tactical maneuvers that are designed for air combat, of course, like a inverted pass. It looks like it's an inverted pass, but actually it's not. I keep the G-forces to just 0.1 positive. This particular airplane is actually a challenge to fly rather than fun to fly, because fun, we all do this for fun anyways. But this airplane is a real challenge to master. since the landing gear is rather narrow and also the wheels are very far in front of the center of gravity, which makes ground handling particularly tricky. But once in the air, it really flies quite nice, like other airplanes. Maybe to compare by its stick and rudder forces with the Mustang. So far it's been a pleasure, of course, to fly this beautiful airplane, but it's also every time you hold your breath when it comes to takeoff or landing.
Without regular military air shows being staged in Germany, ILA also offers an opportunity for the German armed forces to show off its wares to the public. Here's a familiar machine being put through an unusually spectacular display, a Sikorsky CH-53G from the Heeresflieger, the German army aviation. Specifically, this aircraft from the Heeresflieger Waffenschule, the German army weapons training school at Bückeburg near Hanover. Sadly, the Heeresflieger called off its intended roll demo at ILA this year, but examples of its two latest types were still to be seen in the air, thanks to Eurocopter, who demonstrated both the Tiger and the NH90 as solo routines. And another manufacturer's contribution was the Eurofighter EF-2000, the Typhoon name not being used by the German Luftwaffe. This an in-service example, but being flown by EADS test pilot Gary Kraneboul. And here are four more Luftwaffe EF-2000s heralding the start of the Air Arms Air Power demo. The scenario being played out here involving a pair of F4F Phantom IIs from Jagdgeschwader 71 at Wittmund, acting the roles of intruder aircraft and being intercepted by the EF-2000s. A number of Luftwaffe Tornadoes flew through, simulating various recce and attack passes. Before a Transall C-160D landed on to rescue a group of hostages.
Sie hat eine Reichweite von 4.500 Kilometern.
Top cover for this simulated recovery mission being provided by the Tornadoes and EF2000s, while coming in to protect the Transl as it waits on the ground, a pair of Bell UH-1Ds. The Phantom, the Transl and the Huey all now approaching the end of their service lives with the Luftwaffe. Providing the finale to the Luftwaffe TAC demo, one of the Air Arm's Airbus A310 MRTT's multi-role tanker transports, simulating the refuelling of a pair of EF2000s, with the two F4Fs holding station alongside.
I really did enjoy that trip to Germany, that trip to Berlin. A fantastic show, ILA, and a wonderful city, of course, to visit, and somewhere I hope to visit again in the future. 2010, of course, then the 70th anniversary of the Battle of Britain year, and one show that was at the forefront of those commemorations was Riyadh.
And this was how the Royal IAT commemorated the 70th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, with multiple aircraft, and aircraft from both sides of the combat, from the British and the Allies and from the Germans. The United States' newest and highly advanced fighter, the F-22 Raptor, only put in appearances at Farnborough and the Royal International Air Tattoo.
So my job as the F-22 demonstration team commander is to take the world's first fifth-generation fighter, the F-22, and showcase it to the public on both the U.S. and world stage, like we are here at Riyadh. The aircraft has so much capability. The leap in technology from a fourth-generation fighter to a fifth-generation fighter like the F-22 and F-35 is amazing, and people see it right from the takeoff when I square up the jet right into the vertical and start putting it through a sequence of maneuvers that a lot of other airplanes can't execute. Actually, the maneuver sequence that I'm executing while I'm flying the display are actually right in the heart of the envelope for the aircraft. So performing those maneuvers is actually relatively simple in terms of my inputs to the flight controls. And that's one of the things that separates the F-22 from a lot of the other jet demonstrations is these are combat-coded aircraft. They're in a go-to-war configuration. The only thing we don't have are live missiles, bombs, and bullets on the aircraft. But there's nothing modified about these aircraft, and we're operating right in the heart of the envelope for where it's designed to fly. I like the entire demonstration. It's a thrill for me every time I get to do it, and every time I get to interact with the crowd and showcase the capability that we have with this fifth-generation fighter. But probably my favorite maneuvers are the power loop, where I kind of stand the jet on end and flip it end over end just within its own wingspan, really, or nose-to-tail span of the aircraft, and also the tail slide when it's actually sliding backwards. A lot of other planes can't do that, or they're worried about the engine, and that's right in the heart of the envelope for this aircraft. It does it with no problem, does it effortlessly. This is my first time over in the UK, and everybody since I've been here has been phenomenal, and interacting with the crowd, everyone's been so friendly, and to come here to Riyadh, which is a phenomenal event, and celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, it's been amazing. It's been an absolutely amazing experience, and I'm guaranteed I'm coming back because I want to spend some more time over here. This has been great.
I couldn't resist sneaking in that F-22 display from Riyadh that year. Remarkable performance as always. All of this material that I'm pulling together for this video now is taken from our on-demand service at watch.planestv.com. And this weekend, if you're watching this live, the end of August 2020, I've just published a few interactive in-cockpit, well, they're not interactive, they are in-cockpit special features from that British Airshow's 2010 programme. So if you feel like sitting on board the Team Viper, the 4 Hunters flying at Lucas in 2010, or flying amongst the mass Spitfire formation at Duxford at the Battle of Britain show at the end of the year, or the Hunter display at Duxford at the Spring Air show. It's misdemeanor. I feel like sitting over Jonathan Whaley's shoulder through his display sequence. They're all available on that on-demand service. So we've just had those 70th anniversary of the Battle of Britain commemorations at RIAT. Another show marking that anniversary was Shoreham.
But although the flying display was limited at Shoreham, the highlight was the Battle of Britain anniversary commemorations. The venue was an evocative backdrop to the set piece. There were Spitfires and Hurricanes and the Hispano-Bouchon playing the part of the Messerschmitt 109.
Down as the Spitfires come over in formation.
Now, in a good year, the school summer holidays mean lots of Seaside air shows, and in 2010 we covered very many. And I thought I'd use the Seaside show as an excuse to bring in a bit of Vulcan action. This is actually a clip from our Vulcan People programme and features the Vulcan flying display at Lowestoft.
The middle of the airshow season means Seaside shows. The Lowestoft audience weren't put off by summer rain. We Brits like to be beside the seaside. Once again, somebody came up to me this morning, this being the second day of the show, and said to me, "Are you with the Vulcan?" And I smiled broadly and said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Well, it was the one aeroplane in the show yesterday where everything stopped and everybody dropped what they were doing and came out to watch it. And we find that happens just all the time." Of course, this year's Lowestoft show has been notable for its pretty bad weather. And yesterday, the first day of the show, we really thought that an awful lot was going to be cancelled. In the event, almost nothing was cancelled, and the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight made it, the Red Arrows made it, and of course, Vulcan made it. And she looked absolutely fantastic against the backdrop of this seriously grey and cloudy sky as she flashed to and fro. Of course, one of the problems with the Vulcan is that her permit to fly only allows her to fly in what's called visual meteorological conditions. That means basically avoiding the clouds. Well, on a day like this and yesterday, that is actually quite difficult to do, and it says a lot for the professionalism of the crew, Martin and Kevin and Barry, that they were able to do that and to get here and do this fantastic display. one of the new things we saw yesterday was Vulcan with her wheels down. Now, of course, if you're on an airfield, you see her taking off and landing, probably, so you see her with the wheels down, but at a Seaside show, of course, she's not doing either taking off or landing, and in general, she doesn't put the wheels down unless she has to, but they've decided, I think, that people like to see her with the wheels down, so they did, almost as the last thing they did in the display, they flew past with the wheels down so that everybody could get a good look at what she looks like. And then, of course, finally, she did her climb away with the full power on those 4 Olympus engines. The weather got even worse the next week, and seriously bad conditions meant that Vulcan couldn't fly for the displays at Bournemouth, Shoreham and Sywell. You can see why. In fact, at Bournemouth, practically nothing flew.
Well, not much has changed with regards to the British summer weather, I'm afraid, speaking as someone who's just tried to camp through Storm Francis. On then to another European show and much brighter conditions in parts. We did have lots of rain showers at the Gothenburg show in Sweden in 2010, but those meant that the air was very clear, and that improves things a lot for video, for still photos. A bit of brightness and clear air really do make the aircraft pop, especially when you've got a really nice contrasting sky in the background. All of those things you could use to describe the material you're about to see from the Gothenburg show.
A very special occasion indeed on the 2010 display calendar was the Aeroshow, staged at Göteborg, better known as Gothenburg, in Sweden.
Hello, my name is Daniel Karlsson, and welcome to Sweden and Gothenburg Airshow 2010. I work here at the museum as a marketing manager, and the museum Aeroseum is a foundation, and we want to preserve the history of this particular base and also the history of aviation. This is now our 3rd year as an air show, and we are still progressing, and we are very happy with the attendance, and people seem to be very happy here. This year we have, of course, the Swedish stuff, with all the historics like the Lansen and Draken and Tunnan. Also we have 3 international teams here from Switzerland, from Italy and Denmark.
The theme for Aeroshow 2010 was the centenary of aviation in Sweden, and the event also saw the retirement of one of Sweden's longest-serving military aircraft types, the Vertol HKP-4. Licensed built by Kawasaki in this case, the HKP-4 has served for over 40 years with the Swedish Armed Forces. This was the final flying example of the type, and when it landed on, it was completing its last flight. It'll now be preserved at the Aeroseum. By contrast, the agile AgustaWestland AW109 has only recently started its Swedish Armed Forces service, designated the HKP-15 locally, as a multi-role and light utility helicopter. Impressing everybody and probably surprising a fair few of the audience with its low-level entry, here's a TP-84 Hercules from F7 wing of the Swedish Air Force at Såtenäs. And of course we saw the solo Swedish Air Force Gripen display. Like the Hercules, the solo Gripen hails from F7 wing at Såtenäs, which also functions as the Gripen OCU, the display pilot for 2010 being Captain Anders Björk. What is perhaps one of the more underrated military display teams on the European circuit was provided by the Swiss Air Force as their contribution to the Gothenburg show, the PC-7 team with their 9 Pilatus PC-7 turbo trainers. All of the 9 pilots flying in this display are Swiss Air Force fighter pilots for their day jobs. They're led by Hauptmann Bernhard Lehmann, an FA-18 Hornet pilot from Fliegerstaffel 18, who instructs for the Pilotenrekrutenschule on the PC-7. No doubt, though, that for the crowd in Gothenburg, the highlight amongst the display teams present was the Italian Air Force Frecce Tricolori. The weather over the show weekend in Gothenburg had been somewhat mixed, but towards the end of the flying programme on both days, the conditions were perfect for Major Jan Slangen to lead the Frecce through a typically immaculate display. I'm sure many of those watching will have agreed that aerobatic team flying doesn't get more spectacular than that of the Frecce Tricolori soloist, Major Simone Cavelli, flying his crazy flying performance. On a somewhat less dynamic, but certainly still welcome note, was another of the national display teams present, this one Baby Blue. 4 pilots from the Flying School of the Royal Danish Air Force on the Saab T-17 Supporter. And it too capable of surprising agility. There was also another chance to see the Royal Danish Air Force's F-16 display, the pilot looking like he was firing off almost his entire season's quota of flares. Now, if there's one man in Europe who really embodies the spirit of the pioneering aviators, it's Mikael Karlsson. This highly talented pilot and restorer of vintage aircraft was on terrific form in Gothenburg, flying one of his two Tullin A's, the Swedish license-built version of the Blériot 11, and his replica CFM-01 Tummelisa. His display in the Tullin was reflecting the main theme of the show, for it recalled the exploits of Carl Cederström, who in 1910 became the first Swede to gain a pilot's license. Meanwhile, in the Tummelisa, Mikael was able to show off his aerobatic prowess with a very spirited routine in this little biplane fighter trainer of the interwar period. Meanwhile, continuing the Swedish aviation history theme were some of Saab's most famous products.
Hi, my name is Stellan Andersson. I'm the chief pilot with the Swedish Air Force Historic Flight. Swedish Air Force Historic Flight is a non-profit association taking care of, maintain and fly the airplane that has been in the Swedish Air Force, and together with that some other interesting airplanes if it comes up. The Vampire is the oldest of the jet age, and after that came J29, Tunnan, and then we have Hunter, Lansen, of course, and Draken also. So Draken is the newest of all of these airplanes that we have here.
This lineup of jets provided by the Swedish Air Force Historic Flight really reflecting the enlightened attitude the Air Arm has to the preservation of its past. Just imagine the RAF still displaying a Lightning. That's the closest equivalent you could get to the fact of the Swedes having this immaculate J-35J Draken on the strength of their historic flight fleet. The aircraft wearing the colours it sported on its retirement from service in the 1990s with F-10 wing at Ängelholm. But let's hear from Stellan Andersson again about some of the earlier Swedish classic jets.
Tunnan is a very special airplane, of course. It's hard to handle, and it's difficult in the takeoff and landing phase of the flight, and also some characteristic in the air when you are flying aerobatics. It's a challenge to fly Tunnan. If you compare to Hawker Hunter, it's a wonderful airplane. That's a pilot's dream.
The Hunter Stellan's talking about, a recent addition to the historic flight fleet, a former Swiss Air Force F-58, today painted in the colours of the Swedish Air Force Acro Hunters display team of the 1950s.
Lansen is a very good airplane also, yes. And that's what we call this sport version, the fighter version of Lansen.
To see the Swedish Air Force historic flights Saab 105, J-29 Tunnan, J-32 Lansen and J-35 Draken in the air together with the modern-day Gripen, a truly sensational sight. And as Stellan explains, there's more to come.
Well, we have, I think now if we can even have the Viggen airworthy, then we have the Saab's all jet history, except for the J-21 ARB. But that was a very special aircraft. But otherwise, and almost what we have had in the Air Force in the past also. So it's a nice collection.
A wonderful classic jet operation they've got going on in Sweden there. I wonder what an equivalent UK operation would, what types would be included in an equivalent UK operation. Leave a comment below on aircraft you'd like to see in equivalent formation. On then, back to the UK and an airshow we don't see anymore sadly, and quite a few types we don't see anymore. To the Dunsfold show, starting with a couple of Hawker types.
It's got a fantastic aviation history. It's been home to Hawker aircraft from the Hurricane to the Harrier, and of course not forgetting the fabulous Hunter in between. They also produced there a few Seahawks, and the Royal Navy Historic Flights example was a very welcome part of the lineup, displaying in glorious light. We saw Gerald Cooper having to deal with very limiting weather at Bournemouth, but it's only fair that we take a look at his full display in good weather.
So this is a CAP 232. It's a French-built aeroplane, aerobatic aeroplane, carbon wing, wooden fuselage and a Lycoming 300 horsepower engine. Today it was a rolling departure, so just accelerate the aeroplane, check the trim, and then set the aeroplane on an upward trajectory and start rolling essentially, and do some point rolls, hesitation rolls, pulling to the vertical to then gain altitude with some slow rolling just to keep it moving whilst I gain altitude really. The power to weight ratio is the main advantage that the aeroplane has, but also it's got a very, very good rudder, so the CAP is excellent in yaw manoeuvres where you can yaw off the vertical and back to the vertical, and so its main capability is slow flight and its ability to change direction in yaw.
Now here's a team we saw at far too few shows in 2010. The Turbulent team have such good entertainment value for an audience that it's a great shame we don't see them more often. I mean, one of the great things about the Turbulent team is they do exciting things like bursting balloons with aeroplanes and limbo flying. Fantastic stuff.
Now, poised everything. Is he going to let it go? Yes, there it goes. Oh! First one coming into the hit. Some of the teams will not be allowed to fly the aeroplane by having. This is not on. What are we going to do? Balloons going up over an airfield. There's only one way to deal with these folks. Everybody lined up for the green balloons. Get it? Yes!
Another team we'd love to see more of are the Red Bull Matadors, and we were able to fly a minicam on board Steve Jones's Su-26 Sukhoi. Leading the formation part of the display is the 2009 Red Bull Air Race champion, Paul Bonhomme.
Putting the heart in the sky. There you are, ladies and gentlemen. Look at that, especially for you. Isn't it wonderful? They do it so beautifully. It's a perfect shake heart.
Hunter and Hurricane are, of course, classic Hawker types, but Dunsfold is perhaps best known as the home of the Harrier.
Yeah, this is an amazing place to be flying the Harrier in the Wings and Wheels show. It's obviously it's where the Harriers were born, so to be back here and flying a Harrier is a fantastic experience. Really, it's great to be here. It's 50 years since the first P1127 flew, and it's 50 years this year since the first vertical takeoff. But the jet you see behind me today, the Harrier GR9, is the latest incarnation of the Harrier. It's completely different to the original Harriers that flew in those early days. Whilst it might look slightly similar, and the basic layout of the aeroplane is the same, the engine's in the middle, it's got a high wing that has anhedral. The actual aeroplane to fly is completely different. It's a lot more stable than the original designs. There's a lot of technology in there making it more stable, but also the avionics, the systems, the navigation systems, the computers that we use to operate the aeroplane are completely different as well. And the capability of the jet is something that the old test pilots would probably not believe how much it's advanced. Actually, it's a combat-proven, modern, capable aeroplane that's got the capability to remain in service for a good few years yet and remain credible as well.
At the time of the show there, we weren't to know that by the end of 2010 the Harrier would have flown for the last time in Royal Air Force hands.
And that brings us neatly, if a little sadly, to our very last part of this look back to some of the highlights from the 2010 Airshow season, and we're extending out of the Airshow season to see the very final flights of the Harrier in Royal Air Force hands. This was in December 2010.
We're here at RAF Cottesmore on a bitterly cold December 15th, and we're here to say goodbye to the Harrier. They're hoping to fly a 16-ship formation, but the cloud is very low. But if they can put 16 aircraft in the air, well, that will be a feat worth coming to watch.
I've been in the Air Force for coming up to 13 years now. I was originally a creamy QFI on the Hawk at Valley, which is so went through flying training, got my wings, and then became an instructor on the Hawk straight away. Since then, I've been flying the Harrier. I've been doing that for 6 years, and this year I'm obviously the display pilot. It's 50 years since the first P1127 flew, and it's 50 years this year since the first vertical takeoff. But the jet you see, the Harrier GR9, is the latest incarnation of the Harrier. The actual aeroplane to fly is completely different. It's a lot more stable than the original designs. The pilot in the cockpit is there to manage the systems on board and to operate the systems in the correct tactical manner to get the best out of it.
The Harrier will be no more on these shores, and that's going to be a very sad day.
Yes, it is, but I think I'm a bit more cross than I'm sad. I mean, there are 5 other countries still flying the aeroplane, And I think the fact that the United Kingdom is stopping flying its last 80 perhaps says more about the United Kingdom than it does about the aeroplane, to be honest. In the early 70s, when we were taking the aeroplane to the Paris Airshow on a regular basis, Paris and Farnborough, because the world didn't know about jump jets then, you know. And this particular Paris, I think it was either 71 or 73, I was doing a Harrier display every afternoon. But we had a Hurricane with us, PZ865, the last one built, and I flew a Hurricane display in the morning and a Harrier display in the afternoon, and I thought, I'm getting paid for this. That was a good week, that was. Gordon Lewis, who designed the very first Pegasus, he died a few weeks ago, but he did a brilliant job in conceiving that engine. The external size of the latest Pegasus, the hole it's got to fit into in the airplane, has hardly changed, you know, in 40 odd years. But the thrust has gone up 2.5 times, and that's been the achievement of the engine manufacturer.
I've been flying the airplane since 1994. I've came straight through training, always been a Harrier pilot, and I'm now the commanding officer of what was the conversion unit, the training unit. We're not training anybody anymore, so we're spending our final days supporting the Army as they get ready to go out on Op Herrick. Seeing operations in the Balkans through the 90s. At the end of the 90s, we were flying off the carriers into Iraq, trying to get Saddam to let the weapons inspectors back in. Op Herrick in 2003, to remove Saddam Hussein from power, and then clearly we spent 5 years operating in Afghanistan. It is a very special day. We're just about at the 50th anniversary of the first Harrier hover, but clearly, yeah, we are sad that we're at the end of UK VSTOL aviation.
A sad sight indeed, and that brings us to the end of this look back to the 2010 airshow season, or the aviation season I suppose I should say. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, I did mention earlier, but I've put a few in-cockpit special features on our on-demand service, so all of the programmes that you've seen clips from in this video are available on the on-demand service, but I've also just added a few in-cockpit extended special features. That includes the Spitfires at the Dunsfold Battle of Britain Airshow in 2010, the Hawk Hunter Misdemeanor displaying at the May Show at Duxford, and also Team Viper, the 4-ship of hunters displaying at Lucas at the end of the year in 2010. They're all available on the on-demand service now. That's at watch.planestv.com, and there's a free trial available at the moment over there, so hit the link in the description below to go check some of those things out. My name's been Ian, still is Ian, still will be Ian. I run Planes TV, and I hope you've enjoyed this look back to some of the highlights of the 2010 airshow season. I'll see you again next week with hopefully a look to some Scottish airshow flying. See you then.